I think the key thing to remember about our great republic is that it's a representative republic.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, a current member of Congress and a former one try to bridge the partisan divide. Well, earlier this week, Democratic Congressman Matt Cartwright of Pennsylvania, a graduate of Hamilton College, spoke at the campus with Republican former Congressman Steve Russell of Oklahoma. The conversation is part of an ongoing series meant to bridge the partisan divide in America and tackle some of the major issues of the day. I spoke with Cartwright and Russell just before the event. So I want to begin with a basic question. Everybody tells me, from congresspeople from New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut and Vermont, that they don't really know folks from the other party as much as they once did in Congress, and they have a hard time getting conversations started across the aisle. Is that true to both of your experiences? And we'll start with Matt.
Sure. Well, Ian, first, thanks for having us on. And I'm a fan of WAMC and a bigger fan of your Capital District Congressman, Paul Tonko.
Yeah, New York 20.
Who's been there every... That's right. I regard it as part of my job to develop relationships across the aisle, and here's why. You don't need to be a politics and government major to understand that you need to have bipartisan support for a piece of legislation to be passed into law. For example, I'm a Democrat. If the Democrats have control of the House, sure, I could pass a bill with only Democratic support through the House. But you know what happens when it gets to the Senate. They have this filibuster rule that requires 60 senators to sign off on a bill before it can be even voted on to be passed into law. And so what that means is when I think of a bill that I really want to get passed, I have to think about how am I going to garner enough Republican support in the House to send a signal to the Senate that this is okay for Republicans to get behind. For example, I was the author of the Camp Lejeune Justice Act to help the Marines and the Marine families who were poisoned by the water down there have a day in court. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had that. Well, I was able to get 55 Republicans to support that bill as co-sponsors. And so that when it passed the House and it went over to the Senate Republicans could see they weren't going to be jeopardizing their careers if they got behind that bill. That's the way it is. You have to have bipartisanship to get bills passed just from the structure of the way things work in Congress. And that's why I think it's a part of my job to develop relationships across the aisle. And I'm proud to tell you that knowing that going in, I'm in my 12th year now. In my time in Congress, I have introduced more bipartisan supported legislation than any other House Democrat. That's because it's intentional.
Let me put the same question to former Congressman Steve Russell of Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, Matt and I worked on bipartisan legislation quite a bit together. We traveled to foreign countries together, working on national security issues, immigration. We worked on waste. We did an awful lot of work in that arena where you could do some savings. I think the key thing to remember about our great republic is that it's a representative republic. And what might be different in Vermont is different in Oklahoma. But that doesn't mean you don't have overlapping circles where you've got some common interest and common space. Where we make the error is where we try to negotiate from position rather than from interest. And if we negotiate from common interest, then we can find some overlap. And then if we stay in that space, it's amazing what can get done. But when we try to move people out of their position Well, it just doesn't go so well. Communication shuts down because there's nothing in common.
Congressman Russell, I want to start with you on this particular question. Generally speaking, and you have the luxury of not being there anymore, but what have you made of the upheaval on the Republican side, going back to Kevin McCarthy losing his speakership, and now people like Marjorie Taylor Greene having potentially Speaker Mike Johnson, one vote away from removal?
Well, I think it was a grave mistake to have any rules on any party where you would have one member hold the whole nation hostage. I think that was really a bad way to go. That's not to say that each side doesn't have its issues. Look, our Congress is as divided as it's ever been. We've got only a couple of seats that separate it. We've never been that divided, perhaps not even before the Civil War. So we really need to look at that. Maybe we need to, take the teapot off of the burner and let some of the steam out, because this divisiveness is not going to get anybody going anywhere. And where you've got, 6 people that decide that they're going to shut down the functioning of the House, that's just the wrong way to go. And don't think for a moment that the Republicans are the only ones that have faced similar issues. You had Joe Cannon and others way back. Our nation is full of history of proud, selfish people trying to force their way rather than having a representative republic where you look at what's best for the nation. And we've got to quit fighting over the wheel of the ship of state for control while it's heading for the rocks. Maybe we ought to look at it and say, hey, the nation is bigger than me. The nation is bigger than my district. The nation is bigger than my social media. We really have to get back to that type of service.
Congressman Cartwright of Pennsylvania, please do.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I couldn't agree more with Steve on that. And I must say, Steve, we miss you in the Congress.
I miss working the issues. I don't miss the nonsense.
Well, if we had a whole conference of Republicans like Steve Russell, there wouldn't be any nonsense. And you can see what guides a guy like Steve is humility. He just said it. It's selfish, self-centered legislators trying to make it all about themselves that are causing the problem. And I don't think you need to be a psychologist to see that. Right now, I saw a statistic, and Ian, you can correct me, but you know how Harry Truman railed against the 1946 Congress, Republican-controlled Congress. He called it the Do-Nothing Congress. And that was part of a campaign strategy that worked, and he did get reelected in 1948. But that Do-Nothing Congress passed 900 bills. The current Congress passed fewer than 50 bills.
That's correct.
So the current Congress, this Congress we're in right now, it's the Do-Nothing Congress, not on steroids, but on sleeping pills.
So let me follow up then and ask you about one of the issues that you'll be discussing at Hamilton College, and that is what to do about the border. I think, people who pay attention to Congress were maybe somewhat puzzled about how things played out with the latest border deal. The White House and the Senate were able to agree to a compromise over what to do on immigration, and it had a lot of what the Republicans in the House said they wanted, but then that bill was effectively killed, and we understand that was under some pressure from former President Donald Trump. So, as someone who's not in Washington, it seems like there potentially was the will to come together and make a compromise over immigration, but what happened? It didn't work out.
Yeah, well, I think that there is that willingness, and again, it goes back to you have a handful of people. You obviously saw broad bipartisan support in the Senate. If you had had the chance to vote on it in the House, it would have passed. What you have instead is you've got people that want to make the issue something else, and rather than taking half a sandwich, they opt to demand the whole sandwich, and then they go hungry, and we have nothing. And so we can't govern that way. We can't do things that way. We have to secure the border. It is a national security issue. Both sides of the aisle see it. They've sat in the classified briefings. They know the issues. So why don't we do something to fix it? But again, you have people that are trying to play to some national media base. And, if I may, I think that that's part of the problem. Because we give them voice and we give them platform, we don't give the Matt Cartwrights and those that are working on the other side of the aisle, passing bipartisan stuff and getting things done, any press. But yet we will take the Marjorie Taylor Greens or the AOCs or whoever, and we make everything look like conflict. And so because of that, we actually empower them. And the same thing was true for former President Trump. We empowered his, incivility. We empowered it, and shame on us.
And what's your view of this, Congressman Cartwright?
Yeah, let me give you some context. Steve and I are speaking at Hamilton College as part of something called the Common Ground lecture series, and it came to my attention at my 40th college reunion last summer when I met Brigadier General Ty Sedgwill, who is there as a visiting professor in a fellowship. He was the chair of the history department at West Point and the author of an amazingly good book called Robert E. Lee and Me. I met Ty Sedgwill, and he told me about the Common Ground lecture series, and I said, I'm in. Now, you talk about the border. Steve's right, and that compromise in the Senate was really quarterbacked by James Lankford,
from Oklahoma,
who is an Oklahoma Republican like Steve. And Steve and I both served with Senator Lankford when he served in the House, because Steve and I were both on the Oversight Committee, and so was Lankford. So I got to know James Lankford. I recognize him as a thoroughgoing conservative Republican, but he cobbled together a compromise in the Senate that was acceptable to the White House, and I think Steve is right. I think it would have passed the House. I would have voted for it. Doesn't have everything I want, but we have to get off the schneid with the border, and it is a source of great regret that kind of dynamic that Congressman Russell just described took place and prevented us from doing that.
Let me wind up our conversation by asking you both about November, because I think it's fair to say the looming election with all of the House members and many senators, and of course the rematch for the White House taking place, is having an effect on what happens in the Congress this year. There's no question about it. What do you both think is at stake in this Biden-Trump rematch, given what happened the last time in 2020? I mean, we're still arguing about whether even that election was fair at this point.
Well, I think what we can't do is get exasperated with our government and storm the Capitol steps. That's what we can't do. Neither can we set fire to courthouses and burn cities. America needs to take a step back. We have people on both sides of the aisle that think burning the place down and doing something else has got to be better than the current situation, and that is an absolute lie. It reminds me of the fire eaters prior to the Civil War in 1860. We're in a dangerous spot, and so America needs to take a step back, take a deep breath. We have a resilient nation. We have a wonderful people. We have every resource that you could possibly imagine. We have good standing in the world. What we don't need is to tear down our own institutions, and that concerns me.
And back to Representative Cartwright now.
There's no question that what has led to this kind of partisanship, this kind of really this horrible presidential election, the tenor of this election for president that's been going on for a good long time now. I think that expresses the frustration of the people. There's a lot of people out there who feel left behind, who feel that government is helping other people but not me. That feel like they want change, and I understand that. From my own perspective, I work as hard as ever I can to effect change within my own congressional district. For example, we're reinstituting passenger rail between New York City and Scranton, Pennsylvania, in my district. That's going to be a big economic shot in the arm. I think economics is a big influence on all of it. If life is not working out as well as you had hoped economically, it's kind of an American tradition to blame whoever is in the White House and ask for change. But Steve's right. Let's not look for the kind of change that burns down our institutions. If you want to throw a Molotov cocktail at Washington, that's fine, but let's not get rid of American democracy. Remember what Winston Churchill said about democracy. It's the worst possible form of government except for every other.
Yeah, and I think it was a Democrat that said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And when we turn it outward rather than inward, it becomes a little different viewpoint.
Steve Russell is a former Republican congressman from Oklahoma's 5th District, and Matt Cartwright is a current Democratic congressman from the 8th District of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Good talking with you.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.